Welcome to today's session around EKS optimization. This is going to be a workshop, so there will be some hands-on activities for you to follow along with. Really, today's purpose is around how to migrate to Carpenter. So we're going to look at a few different things and have you run through a few scenarios and then watch what happens so you can do your own contrast and compare. And so just to give you a little bit of insight, for your panelists today, those of us presenting, my name is Greg O'Hare. I'm the Director of Technical Solutions for NOps. My counterpart at NOps is Tiago Carvalho, and he is a Senior Cloud Architect. And then we're also honored to have Mike McDonald, who is a Partner Solutions Architect from AWS, with us today. And just in terms of some housekeeping, what I'm going to do is pass the mic over to Mike, no pun intended there, to kind of walk through the process of getting into the lab environment so we can go ahead and get started with the workshop. So Mike, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Greg. All right. So as Greg had mentioned, we're going to be able to do some hands-on work in AWS today, and we're excited to be able to give you some, fresh, new accounts to do that work in, so that you don't have to worry about anything getting billed to your own personal or work accounts. These are on us. That said, we will ask that you follow along with the lab content with these accounts. Don't spin up anything crazy that we don't need for this lab content. Please don't mine any crypto on our accounts here for the workshop. And we can go ahead and move through the content today. So in the chat, I'm going to go ahead and post a link for you to join in and open up this account. If you do have your AWS account logged in on your browser, you're going to want to log out of that or open this in like an incognito kind of private window. And then once you have clicked that link, I'm going to bring up a little visual to kind of help walk us through getting access to that lab environment. So once you've clicked that link, you should see a sign-in method here. And we're going to want to use the email one-time password option there. For this, you're going to want to use an email that you do have access to right now, because it's going to send that one-time password. We'll use that to get the rest of the way logged in to the AWS account. From there, once you receive that password, which I'm sure will take a minute or two to get through, so we'll pause for a moment after I'm kind of through some of the instruction. Once you have entered that passcode, it should bring you just straight on through to these terms and conditions, because that link is kind of a deep link to take you past the event access code stage. But if it does ask you for an event access code, we'll provide that as well. Let me just drop that in the chat here. Yeah, so that access code is there for you if it doesn't take you straight on through to those terms and conditions, but you shouldn't need that. And just kind of a brief touch on the terms and conditions there. That is an agreement, kind of like I had mentioned in my little disclaimer at the beginning, just agreeing that you're not going to do anything, way outside the realm of what our workshop content is with these accounts. It's fine to play around and kind of get some hands-on experience with the different options in, the subject matter area that we're reviewing, but we would prefer that you kind of keep it to, EKS, cost optimization, the focus of our workshop here today. So in the chat or with, I guess in the chat, can we get like a +1 if you've kind of gotten that one-time password, and if you're successfully getting through to the EKS workshop event page, which is what you'll see after agreeing to those terms and conditions and kind of moving on through. That'll kind of let us know when we're ready to move forward.
Yeah, and if you have availability to see, we also have the raise hand icon in the bottom of the Zoom meeting panel. So you can use that as well. But we'll give everyone another minute, and then we'll go ahead and get started so everyone can get hands-on. All right, Mike, if you don't mind, I'll go ahead and start sharing again. We'll go through. I'm looking at what's going on around, and it's looking like we've got quite a few people able and ready and willing. So again, for those of you who may have just joined, in the chat, we have the link to the workshop. It's the link that starts with catalog.us, and then the code can take you in there if the email does not, doesn't bring you right in. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. I'll show you what it looks like from my end. Right, we're going to follow along. By all means, if you have a question that comes up during, if you need to reach out to us to get some sort of insight, maybe something didn't quite work the way that you anticipated, by all means, you can use the raise hand icon. We'll see what we can do. Keep in mind, this is a live session, so, taking a bunch of time to troubleshoot may not be something that we're able to do. However, I've worked with Mike over at AWS. We have been able to configure the workshop so that they will live for the next 72 hours. So in the event that you have to kind of stop what you're doing and watch, you'll still have the availability to come back in and continue to play and follow the steps. And they're all clearly outlined in the documentation, as you'll see in just a minute.
Yep, and I'll be keeping an eye on the chat throughout the session to help troubleshoot anywhere that I can. So feel free to drop it in there as well if you're having any issues.
Perfect. Thanks, Mike. So I went through and I agreed. We can see that I've got my workshop. Well, it ends in 2 days, and we'll just call it 24 hours, 3 days, I should say. And from here, what I want to do is I want to keep this tab open so I have my instructions, but I also want to go ahead and open up the console. Now, this is going to be a full-blown console, as you're familiar with within AWS, and really what I want to focus on is my Cloud 9 and open up that workspace. I like to close this just so I'm not distracted with too many tabs open, and then I can get rid of my welcome screen. And you don't have to, but I recommend dragging up the terminal window just so you have them here. And throughout the session, we will add additional terminals. You can do that by clicking the little green plus in New Terminal. If you're using the Mac, you can also Option T, but just understand that will likely actually launch it in the top window. The reason we can do both is just so we have different windows if we want to look at files. So we're up and running. You can see that everything has been authenticated. We are starting you out with some infrastructure and some tools that have already been configured for today's workshop. In the event that you wanted to go through and do them yourself, we can make available the steps to do that. But really what we want to do is focus on this one section down here that says migrating from Cluster Autoscaler. This is going to start us with going through the idea of configuring Cluster Autoscaler and then how to migrate that to a Carpenter solution. And so if you click to it and spend on it, one is it will start with these steps. And we have to watch what we're doing here because some of these boxes have the copy button, even though they're not necessarily commands that you want to follow along with and copy paste. So we're starting brand new. We don't have to worry about the cleanup chunk. So really to get it all started is getting into configuring this. Now you'll notice there are some things about EKS Node Viewer which we have not yet installed. So that is one piece that we do have to install now. And to do so, if we go into the Install Carpenter link, we can scroll down. And we'll see that there's going to be a whole bunch of different instructions here. What I'll do is instead of having you read through it, we can go ahead and get this command here. I don't think that you have it readily available, Mike, but if we come in here and grab these and we paste that right in the window here. It's the command to go to GitHub and pull in Node Viewer, and that will go ahead and install this. And this is going to come into play. It's basically one of the tools that we don't have pre-configured for you. So again, in the chat room, I've put in the install steps and link to download and install onto your Cloud9 environment. It'll take just a minute. So while you're going through this, if you can give some sort of thumbs up or smiley face or something to indicate that it's either in process or completed. One thing I don't want to do here is, because we are anticipating hands-on, don't want to leave you behind and then have you, trying to catch up or get in a situation where, we're too far ahead of you and you got to remember where you are. All right, it's looking pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead back to my steps, back into the migrating from Cluster Autoscaler. We have Node Viewer, so now we actually can grab this, copy that, and when this is done, we can paste this, and we should start to see information about the nodes that we're already starting you with the cluster. So apologies for the delay here. I don't know if anyone else is also having this take a minute, but that's the glory of a live demonstration and live hands-on. Is that you can't always account for all of this. And so while we're waiting for this, what I'd like to do is just get a quick poll going here. Just a moment here. Go ahead and launch this. While everyone's downloading and getting that configured, we can go ahead and answer, basically a little bit about how you're currently auto-scaling. We're going to go ahead and kind of walk through the differences between Cluster Autoscaler and Carpenter, but we also know that sometimes people have other things that they're leveraging. So we just, curious as to what's happening in your neck of the woods and how you're going about this. All right. I'm going to see some answers coming in. So while that's waiting, and while we're giving everyone some time, I'm going to hit the second command, all right, which is just to go ahead and set this up.
Hey, Greg.
Yes, sir.
Just one interruption. You are sending message just through host and panelist, so maybe everybody didn't receive your go install command. Can you send it again, please?
Yes, and thank you for bringing that up. That was excellent. So apparently no one is going to be going in here. Let me go ahead and set this to everyone. Thank you, Tiago. Drop down change. So now everyone should be able to see the go command to install from GitHub. And then the follow-up sudo command, just so that you get it configured in your local bin. While that's going on, what I'll do is I'll bring this command into my clipboard, and I'll just show you what it looks like. We have nodes in the cluster already configured, but they're not set up yet for what we're going to be doing. So you'll see that there's no nodes found for what we're looking for, because we have the cluster set up, but we don't actually have the nodes deployed as of yet. So we're going to go through and we're going to start setting things up. And basically what we want to do is, if you're not familiar with some of how to navigate this, when we're in Node Viewer, you'll see that there's a Q for quit. So all you do is hit Q on your keyboard and you'll be back to your main screen. This is why we're going to start making use of additional terminals, because sometimes it's easier to just keep all of your command line entries in one tab, and then it allows you to move into another tab to view the metrics updates, we're going to parse some logs and see what the changes are. And that's usually done in a different view just to make things easier. You don't have to, but instead of going back and forth and stopping certain processes and then moving over and then starting them again, it's a little bit easier to just have them in a few different tabs. And then basically what we'll do is come in, see if there's any hands up that I can notice. I think we're good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and continue. By all means, if I'm going too fast, just chime in and we can go ahead and get this set up. So EKS Node Viewer didn't show anything. Again, what we're going to do is we're going to grab this set environment variables block, and basically it's going to just go ahead and export some of those pieces of information so that we can use the variables going forward. Now, you should, at the end of this, see something, cluster name, EKS workshop, in the region, the cluster endpoint, etc. And then it should be back to just the plain prompt. And now we've got that set. We can come back in and continue. So the big piece of what we're going to do now is install Cluster Autoscaler and configure it to scale out an application that we're going to deploy. And we'll be able to watch that kind of happen right before our very eyes. So what we need to do is create an OIDC identity provider so that the cluster can be used for the IAM role. I'm going to go through this at a pretty quick pace, just from the standpoint of, we want to make sure that we get this done so that we can see the actual scaling and downscaling of the application, not necessarily, what each command means. But if you look, we have information about this. So, you can do some reading. Again, this lab will be open 72 hours. So you'll have time to be able to go in and do that. And so it's going to be basically a copy paste session. You'll see that it went ahead and it did create it. So now we have the OpenID Connect. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a Cluster Autoscaler. And you can see that we're going to attach a policy as well. And these are the permission sets that we're going to be giving that. And you'll see it's basically being able to, describe autoscale groups, describe instances, set the desired capacity. So all this via the command line will be able to change these elements. Your mileage may vary in your actual production environment, but we're going to go ahead and copy and paste this. And that's what's really nice about this lab, is that you get to follow along. You get to actually do all of this. And you don't have to worry about it afterwards. So, that's one of the benefits of being here today. And so that has gone through and completed. And most of these commands are pretty quick. So now that we've done that setup, we've created the IAM. So now what we're going to do is basically create the service account. And that's, again, copy paste. You'll see a little bit. This is going to take maybe a minute or 2 minutes. But basically what it's going to do is going to go ahead and create that association so that we can actually do things. So we're going to give everyone a minute. What's nice about this is this does allow for a little bit of time padding. So if people need to play catch up, they can get caught up with some of the commands. All right. And you'll see that that is already done now. Again, it went to the prompt, so I know that it's completed. And from here, this isn't necessary, but just to double check it, this is going to go ahead and run the kube control command to describe what's going on here. So for stuff like this, I will still use the main panel that we're in to run command lines. However, in some of the other ones with the logs in the node viewer, I will end up switching to a different tab with the terminal. But you can see, here's the expected output, and we got that. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to move into actually creating, the node group parameters. So we're going to just copy paste this, and we're going to see what we started with is basically a minimum of 2, a desired, and a maximum state of 3, and that's what's in this table. And from here, we can go ahead and get the nodes. Right? If you haven't seen them before, you can see them now. And we should see that we have 3. So this all matches. And if I'm not mistaken, these are M5 larges, but we'll see that in just a little bit. And again, what we have here, what will be available for 72 hours, you'll see all what the typical responses are and what you should expect to be. Bear with me just 1 second here. We got a chat that just came in. Oh, I see Mike's already on it. Perfect. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to actually deploy the autoscaler. It's going to use a YAML file. And you can see, if you actually read the commands, we're going to change the directory. We're going to pull in this file, and then we're actually going to apply that YAML file. Now, while I'm doing this, I need you to think long and hard about the answer to this question, but how are you actually pronouncing this first piece here? Do you pronounce it kube control, kube cuddle, kubectl? That's the real question of the day. So feel free in the chat if you want to try to type out your phonetic explanation of how you pronounce that. I'd really be curious because I've heard kube cuddle, kube control, and kubectl, and I actually don't have a personal preference. So I don't know if you do. I think that'd be fun. But right now we can see, we ran it. It created the cluster role, the RBAC, right? Authorized it, created the role binding, and then started deploying the actual cluster autoscale. Now, there are some additional elements here, right? We can prevent it from removing nodes where its own pod is running, right? So that's a protective mechanism so that you don't pooch the wrong thing. We're going to go ahead and copy paste that. And then I'm going to show you the first part where we're going to move into another terminal. And then it even actually calls this out too, right? So it's not just me. In the instructions, we'll say, hey, you might want to move into a new terminal for this. And again, that's the plus up here in new terminal. It takes a minute to initialize. And then once you see the prompt, you know you're good. And then I can just paste. Now, this is a whole bunch of stuff, but basically what it's going to start doing is looking if it can actually pare down one of the nodes and get rid of it, which at some point it will. You can see it's starting to scale down, and it's going to continue to cut through this. Now, from here, it will take 1 or 2 minutes. So that's more than enough time to type in answers to the question about how do you pronounce it? Is it kube cuddle, kubectl, kube control, or something else? You go right ahead and you tell me. And then what we'll do is we'll keep checking the get nodes command in our other tab, and we should see something happen. So if you notice, the status has changed, right? We're seeing live, up to date, refreshing. And by the way, if you need to go back to one command or or previous commands, you can click the up arrow, and that will just cycle through. That will come in handy while you're going through this. But we've got about another minute, and then that, for me, that 133-147 node should disappear entirely, leaving me with just a 2. And by the way, thank you, Tiago, for actually typing in the chat how you pronounce it. All right, so while we're still waiting for that, because of our up command, at some point what we're going to do is see something similar to this where we'll see only the 2 nodes, right? And then what we're going to do next is actually start scaling with Cluster Autoscale. This is the fun part as far as I'm concerned. So we don't have to describe this right now. We just did this. If you don't want to, you don't have to. But I'm going to check my nodes real quick and just see we're down to 2 now. I'll grab the command and we'll just show. Right now, instead of 2, 3, and 3, we're actually at 2, 3, and 2 because we've changed the desired state. And from here, we're going to go ahead and increase the max from the 3 to 4. Again, this is up to you. And what I recommend is in this step, if you're doing this on your own during your own time, play around with that max size, right? Move it to 6, move it to 8, move it down to 2, and just watch what happens when you scale. And that's one of the important things to keep in mind when we're starting to look at the differences between Cluster Autoscaler and Karpenter. The node max is also going to be a factor in here. So we've now set that to 4. And if we click this, we're going to get our little table. And it's going to look a little bit different. Now it's 2, 4, and 2 because we've moved that up. And then we're going to just keep going. So this is what it looks like. We've got 2 nodes. And now here's the real fun part. We're going to deploy a sample application. So this is just a very, very simple application. You'll see that it's got inflate in the name, right? You're going to see that we're going to start with 0 replicas. And we're basically going to create this in a subfolder of environment with the name Cluster Autoscaler. And we're going to apply it here. Just like to call that out. And if you actually watch up here, once we do this, because we're creating a file, you'll notice the files are created. So you can see what's actually happening both from this screen and also just kind of the quote unquote physical leave behinds as well. So this deployment is now going on. And if we want to go ahead and look at Node Viewer now, again, this is one of those areas where a separate tab with a new terminal by itself for this purpose comes into play. Going to go ahead and do that. Now we actually see nodes. What I love about Node Viewer is it actually tells you the price per hour up here. And this is going to be a very important factor for what we're going to be doing when we do the side-by-side. You can see that we've got 2 nodes. We can see that we've got 7 pods. All 7 are running. We can see how many pods are on each node and what percentage of its capacity is being utilized. And what I really like about Node Viewer is that it also tells you the type and size of the instance. It would tell you if it's on demand or spot, and it also tells you what its billable rate is. So collectively, these are 19.2 cents per hour, which is $140 each month, right? Now, keep in mind, throughout this workshop, we're not going crazy to scale. It's just conceptual. So just imagine this, multiplied out, generally speaking, in orders of magnitude when you're talking about real life environments. And I think that's going to come, if you keep that in the back of your mind, it's going to come out to really prove out what we're looking at here. So back to our directions, we can also go ahead and look at the actual logs to see the scaling take place. So I'm going to actually Control C on this one and then paste that. So I've got one that's my node look, one that's scaling. One that's actually looking at the autoscale group activity. And then what we're going to do now is scale this, right? We're going to actually change the replica number from 0 to 4, which is going to cause heavy traffic. And if we're doing this right and everything is working, some pods that actually don't have room to fit on the current node that we have. And what this is going to look like is if we watch Node Viewer, you'll see this is updating. You can see the percentage of CPU creeping up. You can see that we've got 11 pods. 2 of them are pending. 9 are actually running. And we'll just continue to watch that for a minute, and then you'll start to see it scale up. But basically what that's going to do is it's going to show you that 2 are going to be scheduled, and then you're going to start to see some other things provisioned. At some point, if we go in, we will see all the nodes. And you can actually see now, it took a minute to update, but we're no longer on 2 nodes. We're now on 4 nodes. And we've got the 15 pods. 4 of them are pending, 11 are running. And our price actually went up, right? So we went to $384 or $280 a month. So we've doubled. And you can see these are updating continuously. We now have all 15 pods running. And you can see kind of what the percent utilization is. Now, we don't have to do it here or now, but what I would recommend in your own time, if you reran this command and set it to something like 6, what that's going to do is it's going to hit some more pods onto the node. We're likely not going to have enough to fit, but because we're setting a 4-node max, we're just going to have some pods that are sitting out, kind of sad and lonely on the side of the street waiting for a friend. So this is something also to keep in mind, is that we might look at this and say, oh, okay, well, it's still only 4 nodes. That's true, but what's not getting scheduled? What's not actually moving to a node? Because the limitation for the max size for the nodes, hasn't changed. So there's just no room to put these pods anywhere. So on that note, I don't want to belabor the point too much, but if we come back, right, we can actually now scale down this whole application. I'm going to skip this step for just a second. We can go ahead and go back here, and we're going to move it back to 2. Now, while that's actually starting, we're going to copy this command, and this is going to look at the, basically looking at the, trying to think of how to frame this. It's going to look at the sizing down. Sorry, the downsizing. So we're going to go ahead and copy paste here, and you can see the event sync logging wrapper. You can start to see what's happening here. Right, didn't trigger scale up, and this will eventually start scaling things down. And if we watch Node Viewer, this will refresh pretty regularly. But what will happen is, if we go back to the 2 replicas, we may not go all the way down to 2 nodes. We might need a 3rd node, but basically we're going to drop the workloads. They're going to get taken off these nodes. Then the nodes, when they're empty, will get terminated, right? So it's a scale up, scale down process, and Cluster Autoscaler does do a good job with that. We're going to get into some of the differences in just a minute, but you can see right here, the status has changed, right? And, things are kind of in motion to continuously move down. And if we start looking down, right, empty node removed. So you can see the whole process of, hey, the pods are no longer on the node. The node is now empty. The node's going to be downsized and or terminated. In this case, because there's no real way to go down, it's just going to remove it. And if we come back to our node viewer, once this refreshes, you should start to see this come down to basically the 2 nodes. But we can also do, as Thiago says, kubectl, and we can see the status in this as well. But eventually that will drop out and move to just the 2 nodes. So I'm going to pause there for a minute, let everyone get their breath if they need it. Excuse me for a minute while I just take a quick sip of my drink. And unless anyone's going to raise their hand, we're going to go ahead and keep going. So we've scaled up, we've watched it, we saw the nodes grow because of the pods, and we saw that each node that was stamped out with the Cluster Autoscaler was an M5 large, right? Every single node that got deployed was an M5 large. And if I change that from a maximum of 4 nodes to a maximum of 12 nodes, and we filled that thing up, it would be 12 M5 large nodes, right? There's no diversity there. It's the whole thing. So what we're going to do is actually walk through the process of going through. Now, this one said 5 minutes, so I may be just a little bit impatient. But if we were to go through and look at this, we would see that there are 2 pods. So I'm going to grab that command, and we'll see 2 pods, which basically is this, where we set it to 2 replicas for inflate. We can see that we've got inflate, and there's the 2 of them here. Now, if I go and do another get nodes, it's finally cleaned up, and we're back down to 2. So that is done. We've scaled up. We looked at it. We've scaled down. And now we're going to start moving into how do we move that and do it in Carpenter. And so what we're going to do is start to go through the process of installing Carpenter. Now, depending on how you handle this workshop, you could have already done some of this. And so the idea is, from this standpoint, had you gone through all of this, it would be more of a reinstall. But we didn't start there. We started with the Cluster Autoscaler piece for today's workshop. So we need to go back to install Carpenter, and then we're going to follow all of the steps here. So it's pretty quick. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly so we can get to the quote-unquote good part. But it's basically copy, paste into the command prompt. So we're going to export the variables again. This time we're going to create an IAM role, an instance profile for Carpenter as opposed to Cluster Autoscaler. And a lot of these steps are very similar. to what we've already accomplished with Cluster Autoscaler, except now it's going to be for Carpenter. And again, this step of the process will probably take a minute or two. So, while we're going through that, I guess if you want to put in chat maybe what your level of experience with Carpenter, if any it is, right? And you can just say, none, a little, medium, or a lot, something along those lines, just so that we have an understanding of, kind of where everyone sits in today's workshop. If this is more of a learning the ins and outs of Carpenter and seeing it in action, or if it's, hey, I already used Carpenter, I just want to see really how different it was from had I had gone with Cluster Autoscale or anywhere in between. I'll give everyone a minute. I have to wait for this to complete anyway. My esteemed panel, I don't know if you have any dad jokes that you want to crack or if you want to continue going. We can wait. I know we've got some people watching, so nothing too crazy if you're going to crack any jokes, but
I'm not sure
another minute.
Joke, but can you go back to the workshop page?
Yes.
If you scroll up to the EKS before, I was just going to say that this is more a marketing for AWS because the price of the M5 it's like half what it was before. So if you compare the price,
Okay. Excellent.
it was yeah.
And yeah, I mean, we started with an M5 large, but your actual structure may be a different instance type. I was contemplating doing something like a C7 double XL. Then I realized we'd have to scale out quite a few replicas to actually get that to move to a new node. So I realized that it may not be the best case to be in to have to scale replicas to like 90 or something like that, or get into editing what the actual requests are, because then I wanted to keep this as streamlined and easy as copy paste can be, just so that's not the hiccup, right? But if you look while this is still going, these are YAML files. If you double click, it will open them up. So, the other thing that you can do is you can manually, if you want to change the command line, you can come in here and you could change this, to 4 CPU. You can save the YAML file, you can rerun it and then rescale. So, you have the ability during the next 72 hours of the workshop being open to you to really kind of play with all of this stuff. And that's why we wanted to make sure that was all available to you. So I love that call out, Tiago. That's great. So that completed. We can see that here, and I know that because I've got the prompt now. So if we go back, we've gone through and we just finished this. And then we're going to go ahead and add the node role to the auth map. Just copy paste, pretty quickly done, right? We're back to prompt, so we know it's successful. And now we can go ahead and describe the configure map that's in there. And that's going to show us really, here's our Carpenter role node here that we were looking for. So from here, what we're going to do is create the IAM role. Now we already have an OIDC provider for this particular cluster name. Remember, we haven't changed the cluster name itself, and we already created that. So you are getting this error. If you had started with just doing the Carpenter piece, you wouldn't have this message. It would have been done. And then when we got to that point with the cluster autoscale provisioning, you would receive it here because we've kept the name of the cluster, which is why we're saying that it's already associated. So I did just want to show that out. Now we're going to go ahead and create the service account for Carpenter. Again, works pretty much the same way as it did with Cluster Autoscale. Takes about a minute to get this done. So while this is waiting, again, if there's any questions, if people are still catching up, if people needed a resource, again, some of you have come in and out of the session. We had a few late joiners. So again, this workshop, we're running through it now, but it will be available for another 72 hours with the login information that you have. It's not associated with your AWS account. This would be free of charge. So again, feel free to play around. Feel free to scale some stuff up, scale some stuff down. Just be mindful, of how big and how many. That's all we ask. But this is now completed. So what we're going to do is confirm that the IAM service account has been created. So there's a command that we can just run. You can see namespace Carpenter, names Carpenter. Just got the ARN in it, appended with Carpenter, so we know it's the right one. Now, what we're going to do is create and role also to allow for Spot. Now, it's not going to come into play too much for what we're doing with the actual control, but in your real world environment, this is going to be necessary for Carpenter to provision to either on-demand or Spot. So, I want to run you through it so you got some experience with how to do that. Now we're going to use Helm, which is already installed within this environment, and we're going to use that to install Carpenter. So first thing we're going to do is just make sure it's the latest version. Very recently, Carpenter moved from .31 to .31.1. So if you're a Carpenter user, just keep in mind that there has been an update. I think it was last week exactly. I might be a little bit off on that. It was very, very much within the last 2 weeks, though. So now we're going to go ahead and install it via Helm. Again, this isn't going to be instantaneous, but it will take maybe a minute or 3. So again, any questions that you have, any commentary that you have or feedback, if you're using Carpenter, what's your experience been? If you haven't, is there a reason that you're hesitating to get into Carpenter? Would love it if the answer was waiting for this workshop, Greg, but, I know that that's probably not the case. But yeah, so we can see that it's already done. Installed Carpenter. Again, this isn't going to be much different than in your real world scenarios, right? I mean, installing Carpenter is installing Carpenter. Running some of these config commands are going to be running some of these config commands. So this is also going to hopefully give you an idea of the time effort it would take to get this done in your real world example. Now, just from our experience, we don't recommend you go out and just deploy this across everything all at once, right? It should be a phased approach. Start with the least important, most dev sort of, it's okay if there's a hiccup situation. And then once you get familiar with that, once you start using it, once you kind of see how it works, start expanding that out. So we're very much with the gradual phased approach, but this should give you some good understanding how it is. Now, this next chunk I'm going to skip because it's really only if you get an error message, but we didn't. So we want to go ahead and just double check, make sure that Carpenter is installed. You'll see that it is. We've got it when it was updated. We can see what version it is, etc. And then we're also going to go ahead and get the pods for that particular namespace. We can see that we've got 2. They're starting with Carpenter, so we can see them there. We can also go ahead and see how many deployments of Carpenter there are. There should be only 1, and we'll see that here. We've got the 1 Carpenter, and there we go. And now what we're going to need to do is create the namespace. Now, if I'm not mistaken, we've already done that in our previous, so you'll see that it already exists. Again, we did that during the Cluster Autoscaler piece, so if you do get that, don't worry about it. And we've actually already installed EKS Node Viewer. That was the first thing that we did, so we're good there. And we're already familiar with the EKS Node Viewer command, so we can move right into the next piece, which is going to actually create a provisioner, but we're not going to do it from here. We're going to go back to the migrate cast from Carpenter, right? We've already done this piece now. We don't need to reinstall it because we've already got it done. We've already checked the deployment. We've already checked the namespace. Now we're going to start removing Cluster Autoscale. So as we click on that, we're going to start getting rid of the elements of Cluster Autoscale. This is going to be pretty quick. It's just removing and deleting. You can see everything's been deleted. So what we're now doing is we're removing all the infrastructure that would allow Cluster Autoscaler to do anything. Again, going pretty quick here. It's just copy paste as you're seeing it. All right, now that that's done, we're going to go ahead and install our basic provisioner for Carpenter. Now this actually has two pieces. You can see that there's a provisioner up here, and then you can see that it's also going to create a node template, and then it's going to apply those components. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that again, paste that. You can see that it was created. Again, if you're following along, you'll see that we have a new YAML file that was created. We've got the provisioner in the node template set as created. And now what we're going to do is start looking at, getting into an application. So we're going to run to get the deployment and the pods. You can see that we still have the inflate. That's our application from previous. We can see the nodes if we want to. So I'm going to take that, copy it. I'm going to go back here. Now I've already got this running, but I like to go ahead and queue that to get rid of it. And then run that command. And we'll see what we've got going on here. We've got 10 pods. You can see it's the 19.2 cents per hour for the two M5 larges. But what we're going to get into now is really the difference. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. And instead of this window being used for the sync events, I'm going to open up the Carpenter logs, because again, different source, right? And now we're going to scale. So we're going to set this up to 5 replicas in this window. And this is where the magic is going to start happening from commitment. So you can see the control provisioner is from Carpenter, right? We can see that a certain number of instance types were excluded, and that's based on what we've set, right, for parameters. You can also see down here that the launch template was created, and then we started to launch a machine. And if we start looking in the node viewer, you'll see that we have a third node now, and it is not, in fact, an M5 large. It is a C6A XL, and you can see the price point here. But one thing I like to call out is that if you remember, when we scaled with the other version, we actually had 4 M5 larges, right? This is one machine, which can handle more than what the M5 large is. So depending on how many pods you've got pushed onto this, it can end up saving you quite a bit of money. And so we can test that theory by, again, as you want to, change this to 6 replicas, change this to 12 replicas, etc. So I'm going to actually change it to 6 because I want to show you one other thing that for me is really important to showcase how Carpenter is different. And that is we should launch just enough to create a smaller C6A large. And you'll start to see it's going through and it's launching a new machine. It's registering the machine. And you'll see here is a C6A. So Carpenter can adjust and create, new nodes that are not necessarily the same size. And that's really what I wanted to convey today, right? Because if we started looking at the price points, if we started scaling up towards different levels of pods, different levels of nodes, that's all going to be a little bit of a variable. But you can clearly see that when we did it with Cluster Autoscaler, it was M5 large, M5 large, M5 large, until you maxed out how many nodes you could possibly have in the cluster. This, we still have the limit to the 4 nodes, but it's going to adjust the size of each of those nodes, even if the following nodes are not the same size, and that in some cases can save you more money. So you can see that the C6A is actually less expensive than the M5. And so again, if we factored in Spot and things of that nature, I'm hoping that you're getting the idea of how powerful Carpenter can be. And Carpenter is an open source, product, I guess, for lack of a better term. It's an open source project from AWS for EKS. And that's really what we wanted to convey today. And I hope you found today's session was helpful. If you wanted to go through, you can continue to go through the lab, right? We already looked at the nodes. We can already see what's in the immersion team. We can actually scope this out and see what's running versus what's pending. We didn't do anything to really test the outer limits of this, but the idea is you can go ahead and change the number of max and min on the nodes for the cluster. You can change the autoscale group back down to 2. I'm going to skip this just because we've already done a lot of this with the cluster autoscaler. This piece doesn't change. But then when you're done, you can just run the cleanup. But that's basically today's session. I wanted to talk about how Carpenter can handle these things, how Cluster Autoscaler handled these things, and the difference between the two. And what's nice about the EKS node viewer is you can see exactly what the price difference would be. So if you're interested in some homework, what I would recommend you do is run through this again, except instead of a max node pool of 4, change it to 6, and then scale up to replicas quite a few times, right? Go to 20 replicas, 30 replicas, go down, and watch the pods and watch the availability. And you can see, this had all 18 ended up scheduled. Well, what happens if I scaled my replica up to 40 pods, right? What's going to happen? Run that test. Run it in Cluster Autoscaler, run it in Carpenter, right? And just get some hands-on and play around with it a little bit. So on that note, I did want to come back and just say, this was part 2, how to migrate to Carpenter. Forthcoming session will be how to optimize Carpenter itself. And that's going to be with some of the NOps technology. And so, NOps, we are an automated FinOps SaaS platform. Our newest component is our compute Copilot, which will help optimize compute workloads through different services that we offer. So if you're interested, reach out. We'll follow up and get you some more information if you need to. Some of what we do is cloud management platform from a visibility and an allocation standpoint. We've got quite a few optimization areas. We can also help with map migrations to AWS. We can also help with well-architected framework reviews. Quite a few different things that we have in store to help you on your cloud journey. And so with that, I do want to thank you for joining us. I know that we're at time. Happy to stay behind a few minutes if anyone has any questions. Thank you, Mike, for joining us today. Thank you, Tiago. And, if you need anything else, just reach out. We're here for you.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.